Welcome to another edition of Green is Good. We're so honored to have Dan Blake on with us today. He's the CEO and co-founder of EcoScraps. Welcome to Green is Good, Dan Blake.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, Dan, before we get into talking about your wonderful brand, can you share a little bit about the Dan Blake story? How did you come to become an ecopreneur? What led up to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Utah. I didn't grow up as an environmentalist. I always enjoyed being outside. And growing up, my family is full of entrepreneurs. So around the dinner table, we would talk about business models and business ideas. And so I just always, growing up, the idea of starting a business and the idea of how businesses work was always something that just always fascinated me. So when I was in college, I was at a all-you-can-eat French toast buffet, and I purchased one plate of French toast, ate all of it, went back for a second, had one or two slices, and as I was throwing it away, just the idea of garbage, just for whatever reason, I thought was really interesting. 30 minutes prior, I just purchased this plate of French toast. I was now throwing it away, and the restaurant was going to have to pay some company to take it to the landfill. And looking at that just from a business model perspective, typically we're buying stuff, but with garbage, you're literally paying someone to take it away from you. So if you put that into a business model, the idea, most businesses have to pay to get their raw materials. But if you could use garbage, you could get paid to receive your raw materials and really flip the typical business model on its head.
Right.
So the idea of EcoScraps really didn't start with the environmental idea, but more started with just a business model that I thought was really fascinating.
That is fascinating, and we all are guilty of the same thing, as you say, ordering too much or just having too much on our plate or getting served too much of the big servings at restaurants and having it to go to trash. So how big of a problem is the food waste problem?
Yeah. So I went back to my apartment and just started researching food waste, really for no other reason than it was a plate of food that sparked my curiosity. And I was blown away with what I found out.
And what year was this about? What year, Dan? Excuse me. I'm sorry.
This was 2010.
Okay, great.
Just over 3 years ago.
Got it. Okay.
So we throw away over 30 million tons of food waste every single year. Wow. And when I read that just seemed like a really big number, but I couldn't visualize that. So, I have no idea how much 30 million tons really is. But in this report that I was reading, a few lines down, it said that's enough food to fill the Rose Bowl Stadium once every 3 days with nothing but food waste.
Wow.
And having been to the Rose Bowl Stadium and knowing how big that is, just the idea of filling that up completely with food waste once every 3 days just blew me away. I mean, that is a ton of food.
Yeah. Wow. So then talk a little bit about, now you grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. You're a young guy. It's 2010. You had this epiphany, the aha moment for EcoScraps. But how did you become, now that you had, you're surrounded by and you grew up with the vernacular and the metal and the DNA of being an entrepreneur, but what was then your first steps forward to actually launch this great disruptive brand?
Yeah, great question. So I was researching all of this, and honestly, I just did not believe that we could be wasting that much food. So the next logical step seemed, for me at least, was to go dumpster diving and to actually see if there was this much food waste. So I got with some of my friends, and we waited until a bunch of restaurants had closed, and we jumped into their dumpsters and started rummaging through all their garbage to see if there really was all this food waste.
Wow.
And again, I was shocked. There were these bins were full of all sorts of food waste. And so it seemed, like there really was a lot of food waste. We started researching the opportunity, and from a financial side, we spend billions of dollars a year in just transporting food waste from grocery stores and restaurants to landfills. So on a financial side, it seemed like there was, absolutely an opportunity there. And then I wanted to see what impacts food waste had on the environment. So food, it accounts for roughly 20% of everything that's in the landfill. It's the single largest segment of what's in the landfill. But as food rots, it emits methane gas, which is a greenhouse gas that's 20 times more damaging to the environment than CO2.
Right.
And one thing, again, that I had no idea about was just the environmental impacts of food waste and that it was creating all this pollution. All the cars on the road in the U.S. generate roughly 12% of the pollution that the country generates. The methane coming from landfills, coming from food waste, generates between 8 and 9% of all the pollution that we generate as a country.
Wow.
And so just think about that food is almost, food waste in landfills is almost creating as much pollution as all the cars on the road in the U.S.
Unbelievable. And for our listeners out there, this is amazing, this story. I want them also to follow along. If you have your tablet or your in front of your laptop or any of your mobile devices, pull up Dan's, while you're listening to the interview, pull up Dan's website. It is really very instructive. He's got a great YouTube video on the landing page. It's EcoScraps.com. It's www.ecoscraps.com. So now you realize not only is there the problem of getting rid of this stuff, all this food waste, this 30 million tons of food waste every year, what a horrible waste, but there's also all these greenhouse gas emissions coming from it. So it's like a double trouble, all this food waste. Yeah,
absolutely. And so we wanted to see if there was something that we could do to keep food out of the landfill, but also cut down on all of these greenhouse gas emissions, like you mentioned. So one of the things that we came up with was just the idea of composting. And composting by no means is a new idea. And composting food waste isn't really a new idea. But composting food waste on a really large scale did seem to be a new idea. And so we started experimenting, composting all different types of food waste. And we wanted to make sure that we were composting something that a back-home gardener would want to use in their garden. And so we started looking at the lawn and garden industry. And kind of a simplified view of the lawn and garden industry is you have chemical products, like Scott's Miracle-Gro is one that everyone seems to be familiar with. And then most of the organic products were manure-based. And so when you talk to gardeners, gardeners are people that care about the environment. They're already outside. They like to get their hands dirty.
Right.
But you talk to most gardeners, and they're still using chemical products or synthetic products, which I just thought was really interesting. And if you talk to them why, they were just getting better results out of chemical-based products than they were out of manure-based products. And the chemical products were higher in nutrients. The manure, whether it's coming from a cow or a chicken, the nutrients have already been digested by that animal. So the nutrients are a lot lower. It's full of organic content. It helps build the soil's ecosystem, but it just takes a lot longer to see good results from a manure-based soil.
Right.
So going back to food waste, we thought, well, food's really high in nutrients. That's how we get our nutrients. So we wanted to see if you composted straight food waste, if you couldn't get the same nutrient levels as you do with a synthetic bag of like Scott's Miracle-Gro.
Right.
So we started composting, and we came up with a compost where the nutrients were just as high, if not higher, than any chemical competitor that we could find.
So EcoScraps is as good as, if not better than, any of the other brands that we've known and grew up with.
It works just as well, and in many cases will give you better results.
Got it. And how many stores are you carried in now?
So we're in Targets nationwide.
Wow.
We're in Home Depots and Lowe's just on the West Coast. We're in Tractor Supplies nationwide. So, altogether, we're in a few thousand stores.
And by the way, for our listeners out there, on Dan's website, he has brilliantly put a Find a Store locator, so you could go in to Dan's website, EcoScraps.com, type in your zip code, and find a store near you to buy and support his great product, which is all natural. So where do you get, now that you've got this going, you've been, we unfortunately it's a 15-minute interview today, Dan, and I want to just get some critical information out there. We're down to the last 5. How do you get all the food, source all the food waste to grow your brand, and how has your brand grown over these 3 short years of you being joining the family ranks of an entrepreneur and actually becoming an ecopreneur?
Yeah, great question. And so we're getting food from all over the food supply chain. So everywhere from farmers, wholesale produce providers, grocery stores, and restaurants.
Wow. And
so we work with stores like Target and helping them recycle their food waste. We work with groups like Costco.
Right.
We work with all the local food banks around the country.
That's great.
You'd actually be surprised at how much food a food bank is having to throw away. And so we're working with really any type of organization that's going through large amounts of food waste.
And how's your company grown?
Schools. So it's grown really, really quickly. I've been very surprised with the amount of traction that we've had. We started in March of 2010, so we're just over 3 years old.
Wow.
And to date, we've recycled over 60 million pounds of food waste.
Wow. What's the future hold, though, Dan? We're down to 3 minutes, and I'm just so fascinated. I'm just so honored to have you on, a young ecopreneur like you with a great epiphany and vision, and now it's working, and now you're in thousands of stores. How big can you grow EcoScraps in the next 2-3 years ahead and beyond?
In the next 2 or 3 years, I fully expect EcoScraps to be a national brand recognized in lawn and garden and in recycling. So, I would hope that you could walk into any lawn and garden store anywhere in the country, find EcoScraps right alongside any other brand, and that you could go into any grocery store around the country and say, what is it that you're doing with your food waste? And for them to answer, we now recycle it because of EcoScraps. And
you're going to get more retailers to carry your brand.
Yep.
And again, for our listeners out there, it's much healthier for their garden to put a natural product like EcoScraps in, and we won't mention or besmirch any brands, but then the other iconic brands that we all grew up with that are more chemical based.
Exactly. And I mean, in lawn and garden, like you said, there are lots of really good brands, and they worked really well. And so we don't want to say anything bad about any of them.
Right.
And I don't think you need to see the benefits of EcoScraps. EcoScraps gives you the same results as anybody else. It doesn't cost any more to any of our competitors. And the thing that really sets us apart, and the thing that we're so proud about, is it's simply just more environmentally friendly than anybody else. I
love it on your website. It's a stamp of approval, 100% safe for people, pets, and planet. And I love your tagline, no chemicals, no poop, and it's organic.
Yep.
That is great. Hey, we're down to the last minute. Any pearls of wisdom for the young entrepreneurs who are listening to this show, both in the United States and around the world, who want to be the next Dan Blake?
You just have to go out and do it. EcoScraps started with a simple idea in a restaurant as I was eating French toast, and nothing would have happened if I had just thought about the idea. And so if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to accomplish something, you just have to, get out there and do it. My first real thing that I did was to go dumpster diving, which was absolutely disgusting. But you just have to go do something.
I love it. And for our entrepreneurs out there, Dan is so correct. The first two letters of done is do. And Dan Blake, you're doing such a great job, both for the world in terms of recycling, and both for our gardens and our families around the United States and eventually around the world. We so love what your story represents, and you're the best of the new generation. For our listeners out there, support what Dan's doing. Buy his product, www.ecoscraps.com. Dan Blake, you're an innovative entrepreneur and truly living proof that green is good.